So of course, we've been talking about apologetics, and I forgot to change that. We are in lesson 4, not lesson 3. But that's for the folks at home that may be watching this series and thinking that, not at home, but maybe online later. So, we've asked ourselves questions. We're going to just introduce that before we get into what we're going to talk about today. So, the first question we ask is, can we prove that there is a God? And the answer was, no, you cannot prove, okay? Can science prove there is not a God? No, they cannot, all right? And a good-natured atheist is going to tell you that. Well, you can't prove there's a God. Well, you can't prove there's not, and they know that. But they have a set of assumptions that makes them think one way or another, just like we do. Why? Is the reason why we can't. Neither God nor the evolutionary process have ever been directly observed by anyone living today or in the recent past. Okay? So when even a Christian tells you, I have proofs for God, they're using the wrong word. Okay? They may have strong evidence, which I agree that there is out there, and that's what we're talking about. But they cannot prove in the direct, exact way that the word proof actually means. So, why do we discuss apologetics? What's the reason? Apologetics, of course, is a reasonable defense of a belief system that you might have. It's because we are looking at observable evidence to make a decision as to which one of these two possibilities are true. Which way, in other words, do we see the evidence pointing? So, originally in the beginning, there was either a mind or there was matter. Only. Okay? We talked about that a lot the last 2 weeks. Mind or matter. We think that there is a mind, I do, there's a mind at the beginning that created the matter, but something always had to be. Because if there was no mind and no matter, there is nothing to make the universe out of. So, the evolutionist has to believe that something was there in the beginning, that it was eternal. We think God was eternal. They think matter of some form or another was eternal. So we've got to decide which is true. Okay? And we must decide on what we believe. Either we start out with matter with no intelligence, and that over time created the intelligence that we see today. Or, on the other hand, so God created mankind in his own image, and in his image of God, he created them. Two totally opposing points of view. And that's what we're discussing throughout this entire series. It's still going to take us quite a while to get through. There is a guy that would seem to agree with what I have just said and what we've been discussing. And his name is George Wald. Died in 1997, PhD in zoology from Cambridge University, and probably some other degrees. That's just the one I looked up and found. When I was in high school, 1967, so I would have been right around a sophomore, he was the Nobel Prize winner in science. Okay, pretty famous guy at the time. And he was a pretty smart guy, had lots of degrees. And he once told why he made the choice he did, because he was an atheist. And he's speaking at the time of this next quote. He's speaking to a group of atheists. Real smart scientists talking to other scientists. He's telling why he is an atheist scientist. And this is what he said. When it comes to the origin of life on this earth, there are only two possibilities. Creation and spontaneous generation. There is no third choice. Spontaneous generation was disproved 100 years ago, but that leads us only to one other conclusion, and that is supernatural creation. We, talking about that circle of scientists that are in that room, including himself, cannot accept that on philosophical grounds. Therefore, we choose to believe the impossible, that life arose spontaneously by chance. Now, I'm not going to talk about this too awful much, but we are going to bring this up from time to time, and some other people that have said similar things, all right? But, I want to ask first, do you remember what spontaneous generation is? It's a scientific thing that was very prevalent for over 1,000 years, maybe longer. Not anymore, except for in one case. Spontaneous generation was what they thought the reason why, if you left meat out too long, that it got flies and maggots, or if you left carcass out, then you got these flies, and if you left other food out, you got mice, all right? What they thought at the time, and this is up to about the 1600s or so, they thought that these things just appeared out of nothing, that there was no other explanation but this quote-unquote pseudo-scientific reason that they weren't there, now they're there. So poof, they just poofed into existence. Spontaneous generation. Life coming from non-life. But here's what happened. There were some guys, Lazzaro, Spallanzani, and Pasteur. Louis Pasteur is the one I remember studying the most, but I don't think he actually started this research, but he also contributed to it. They came up with some simple ways to prove that that wasn't wrong. This was one of the simple ways they did it. They put meat in 3 different jars, or something like that. One was a flask that was unsealed. The second was a flask that was totally sealed, and the third had a gauze of some kind over the top of it so that air could get in and out, but objects could not. And over the course of days, this is what they found. Flies got into one, not around the other one at all, on the top of the other one trying to get in. Pretty good, simple evidence to show that spontaneous generation that they thought for 1,000 or more years was wrong. So when George Wald says there's only 2 possibilities, supernatural creation or spontaneous generation, he's talking about life from non-life. That was disproved by scientists well before him. Guess what? They came up with a saying for this in Latin, and I'm not very good at pronouncing Latin, but what it means is all life comes from pre-existing life. Remember our second, third lesson, where we talked specifically about if you go back to the monkey, back to the reptile, back through this and this to get to the single-cell organism, eventually you have to go back to what? You have to go back to something that came before that single-cell organism. That's non-life. So, atheistic evolution has to believe that life came from non-life, even though these guys disproved it. They have a way around that now. They will not say this is a scientific axiom, but they only point out that it is only true at the present time. In other words, they say if you go back far enough, that rule probably didn't exist or didn't apply. I watched the video today, and you guys are going to see some of this over time. I'm not quite done with it, but it comes to the point where, and this is a scientist talking, that a lot of times when anybody, whether it's a religion person or a science person or anybody else, gets to a point at which there's a major conflict with whatever they think they're saying, they find some kind of excuse from the past to say, yeah, maybe that's true now, but maybe things were different before. And he pointed out that we all do this. But him being a scientist says this is done in the science world all the time because of their worldview. They have a worldview that says there has to be no God, therefore we have to find explanations that fit. And if there's a counter that doesn't seem to fit, then we're going to find it later, and it's just something we haven't observed yet. We're going to see that happen quite a little bit. Or, as we said before, if you say that a God created everything from nothing in a short period of time, it's often called a fairy tale. Why? If you can conclude that everything came from nothing over billions of years, it's called science. Right? I want to pound that into your head. Okay? And that's one of the reasons why this guy says what he does. We choose to believe the impossible. Nobel Prize, this isn't no fly-by-night scientist that said this. We talked about, already started talking about mutual symbiotic relationships that we find in nature. And I'm just going to show you a couple to refresh your memory. And then what we're going to get into today is some relationships that are found not in the nature world, but other places. So we talked about the dentist fish and the dentist bird that only eat the crud off from certain teeth of others, and they can only eat that, and those creatures have to have their teeth cleaned or they can't exist. Those have to be there simultaneously. They have to be there at the same time. And we also talked about the lobster and that fish there that, or not lobster, shrimp. One digs the hole and the other one protects. We talked about a few others. The bee, the bacteria inside our gut, even oxygen from the humans being breathed in, exhale carbon dioxide, the plants take carbon dioxide, and it's a relationship that if the plants weren't there, the humans didn't exist, and vice versa. And then we talked about the gross ones, all right? The ones where we have mammals that, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and I don't know if there's thousands, probably, because they probably haven't discovered most of them yet. But there are lots and lots and oodles of these sorts of things. So what I want to propose now is, what about necessary relationships in the universe itself? Not necessarily even being in contact with human life form, but just things that are in the universe itself that seem to be a relationship where one depends on the other. The first one I want to talk about here is the Earth and the moon. Okay? The moon's gravitational pull stabilizes the Earth's rotation and creates a consistent day and night cycle. While on the other hand, the Earth's gravitational pull keeps the moon in orbit, providing tides that are essential for life on the planet. Accident? Planned. That's what we have to ask ourselves. Was this an accident? Was this planned? Now the problem is if there's only one of these out there, it's possible, right? But as we're going to look at, again, there's more than they can count. Let's look at another one. Jupiter and its moons. Jupiter's gravity protects its moons from asteroid impacts, and Jupiter's 67 moons gravitational force interactions help maintain Jupiter's stability. So we got our moon and Earth, Jupiter's moons and Jupiter. But what about Jupiter and Earth? Jupiter's gravitational field protects Earth from asteroids and comets. And Jupiter's gravity sucks in the asteroids and the comets, earning it the name of vacuum cleaner of the solar system. Now, I'm not real good at explaining some of this sometimes, so when I'm not, my background is in mathematics, some other things, computers. I'm not a scientist. If you ask me a real technical scientific question, I'm going to answer it with, okay? But I rely on other people. I don't look up Wikipedia, I look up scientists, see what they have to say. This is one that I thought was interesting.
Probably should be thankful for the planet Jupiter's size and the powerful magnetic field that it generates, because it's possible that Jupiter has saved the planet Earth from certain doom. People were laughing at the prospect of an asteroid or comet hitting the Earth in the late 80s and early 1990s, but then something happened that would quiet that laughter. The comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 was discovered by Carolyn and Gene Shoemaker and David Levy on March 18, 1993, using the Schmidt telescope at Mount Palomar. Scientists calculated the comet was originally 1 to 1.2 miles wide. However, tidal forces from Jupiter's powerful gravity had broken the comet into more than 20 pieces as it made its close approach to the planet sometime in 1992. But the biggest revelation was scientists saw that the fragments were going to smash into Jupiter, and luckily for NASA, its Galileo orbiter was still on its way to the gas giant. Many Earth-based telescopes and orbiting spacecraft, such as the Hubble telescope, all were focused on the incredible event that was about to happen. The fragments of the comet were lined up like a freight train and collided with Jupiter's atmosphere, unleashing the force of 300 million atomic bombs. The fragments created huge dark spots in the clouds that measured 1,200 to 1,900 miles and heated the gas giant's atmosphere to temperatures as hot as 53,000 to 71,000 degrees Fahrenheit. If a comet of this magnitude hit the planet Earth, the results would be devastating, with impacts sending dust and debris into the sky, which would cool the atmosphere and absorb sunlight, and envelop the entire planet in darkness. This historic Jupiter comet impact is what led to planetary defense. But fear not, this type of collision was very rare, and scientists say probably only occur every few centuries. Or do they? On August the 7th, an amateur astronomer was looking at Jupiter through his telescope when he captured an asteroid colliding with the atmosphere of Jupiter, creating a white flash visible in the clouds. Some scientists say these impacts are inevitable, with the amount of objects floating around in space, and Jupiter's massive gravity tugging on anything that gets close to it. We could say that Jupiter's like Earth's big brother, and likely protecting us from asteroid impacts.
So look at what we got. We've got the moon and the Earth in a relationship with each other where they keep each other in control and they keep it possible that Earth can be, and these aren't the only things that do this, but Earth can have, be inhabited by life as we know it. And we got Jupiter, whose moons, the relationship between it and its moons do something very similar for them, but we also have the same, have another scenario where what's going on in Jupiter and what's going on the Earth, where Jupiter protects the Earth. Do you think there's a lot more of these out there? Yeah, there is. So what is it that's different about these? What's the nature of these relationships? It's not matter turning into life or life turning into more life. This is inert matter and inert matter. I want you to think about that. How is it that this mindless rocks and gas floating around in the universe accidentally, and the hundreds and hundreds or thousands and thousands of these same sorts of things all happen to take place in such a way to make this the perfect place to live? All right? Seems to me that's another form of evidence that seems impossible for this to have happened by accident when you count these up. How could inert matter know that these relationships needed to exist? How many other mindless accidents are there that are necessary for life to exist on this planet, and we don't even know what they are? And who is it that benefits from these? Do the moons benefit? Does Earth or Jupiter benefit? Not really. Who benefits? We do. We've got mindless matter cooperating with each other. We're going to say right now, we don't know how this happened, but it was for the benefit of humans. These unlikely inert matter relationships benefit humans. We must ask ourselves how this happened and why. Science will ask how it happens and come up with an explanation, but they do not ask why. Because I'm not sure they want to know the answer. Okay? I have a series of 2 or 3 more of these short minute to 2 minute ones that I think I'm going to show before we come up and do a little bit more here on discussing it. But needless to say, the ones I'm going to show you still is only the tip of the iceberg. So this is one that has to do with the planet Earth itself. All right, you ready?
The Bible teaches that the earth was specially designed by God to be inhabited. The earth is ideally placed in the galaxy to protect us from harmful radiation. If the earth were in the center of the galaxy, or stuck in a globular cluster outside the galaxy, radiation would be a real problem. The earth is also the right distance from the warming rays of the sun. Our world is neither too hot nor too cold. Even the tilt of the earth seems ideal to regulate heat. If the tilt were increased significantly, summers would be too hot and winters too cold. If the tilt were decreased, the equator would be too hot and the poles too cold. The Earth's mass determines the strength of its gravity. Unlike Mercury, our Earth is big enough to hold on to life-sustaining gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide, but not so big that it is a toxic, gaseous giant like Jupiter. Life requires liquid water. Our planet sits just the right distance from the sun for water to flow as a liquid. In fact, 3/4 of the Earth's surface is covered in liquid water. No other planet is known to have this essential ingredient of life. The Earth has just the right chemicals for life. About 99% of the universe is made of hydrogen and helium, but the Earth is different. It's made of heavier elements which can form compounds essential for life. The Earth has a large moon, which keeps the oceans from stagnating, and a magnetic field, which shields us from harmful radiation. The Earth appears to be an engineering marvel, crafted for life, the stage for unfolding God's glorious plan to dwell with man.
So one of the things they mentioned in here was was water, and how not only is it very, very necessary for life, but how it's unique in its liquid form on this planet. And I've learned this over quite a number of years, but one of the things that there's 2 things, more than 2 things, but two things that I know of that they look for when they do deep space exploration going from planet to planet. One is there any kind of evidence of a life form, even if it's like a single cell? Why would they do that? Because they want to show that Earth is not unique. Okay? The other thing is they look for water, whether it's frozen, whether it is in a vapor form that, because it's so hot, but they look for the elements of water because that might mean that way in the distant past or in the future, distant future, that particular place might be more conducive to life. And when they come up and they find these certain things that are that are tilted their way, they make sure that they, even though it doesn't prove it, and they didn't find really what they were looking for exactly, they make sure they toot their horn about it. One of the things that's come up in more recent times is, and I'm trying to remember if it's comets or asteroids, finding crystallized water in those things floating around the universe. Okay, where did those come from? Well, I know I've got a theory. I can't prove it. I'm not even going to tell you what it is. But I don't think it came from where they think it came from. And they can't prove where it came from either. So I'm not sure that proves anything either way. All right? Anyway, just a couple of side notes. Let's look at the solar system itself. I think that's what this one is.
Our solar system has a marvelous assortment of planets and other objects that orbit the sun with clockwork precision. Mercury, the closest planet to the sun, is a crater, barren world with temperatures up to 800 degrees Fahrenheit on its sunlit side. The second planet is Venus. The thick, clouded atmosphere creates a surface temperature of 900 degrees Fahrenheit, even hotter than Mercury. Next is the Earth, so well designed for life. Mars, about half the size of Earth, has mountains, valleys, and canyons, but no liquid water on its surface. Mars has two small moons, each only a few miles across. Farther out are the gas giants. Made of hydrogen and helium, they have no solid surface. Jupiter, the largest of all the planets, is 11 times the diameter of the Earth and has more than 60 moons. The Great Red Spot is an enormous hurricane, over twice the size of Earth. Saturn's amazing rings are made up of billions of moonlets orbiting Saturn's equator. Next are Uranus and its twin Neptune. These planets have strong magnetic fields. Given how rapidly magnetic fields decay, a biblical age of thousands of years makes sense. Also, in our solar system are comets, small chunks of ice and dirt that orbit in elliptical paths, losing material every time they pass near the sun. Comets can't last millions of years. Young comets make sense if the creation is only thousands of years old. The beauty of these worlds, the precision of their paths, and their variety point to the wisdom and glory of their Creator.
I want to look at one more.
Consider the stars of the night sky. The Bible says that God created these wonders to mark the passing.
I was going to look at that one.
The sun, created on day 4 of creation week, to rule the day, to give light upon the earth, and to mark signs and seasons. Astronomers have found only a handful of stars anything like the Sun. It is among the top 1 percentile for mass of stars. It's an ideal size to support life on Earth. Not too small, not too big. A huge red star would swallow the Earth, and a blue-white supergiant would blind us. The Sun is an extremely efficient source of constant energy. Every second it produces enough energy to run 1 billion major cities for 1 year. Secular astronomers believe that the Sun formed from a nebular cloud of dust and gas 4.5 billion years ago. If true, as the gases collected, the Sun would have spun faster and faster, like an ice skater pulling in her arms, and in this case, it should be rotating once every few hours. But in fact, the Sun spins only once every 25 days. The Sun is well behaved as stars go. Sure, it has a few flare-ups now and then, but some other stars have super flares, 100 million times worse than the Sun's biggest flares. Just one super flare would destroy life on Earth. Stars also blast hot gases into space called coronal mass ejections, or CMEs. These CMEs would cause radiation poisoning and death on Earth. But our Sun's CMEs are mild by comparison to other stars. And not only that, the Earth, unlike the Moon, is surrounded by a protective magnetic field. When this field is disturbed, we can see the results. It's called the Aurora Borealis, or Northern Lights, a beautiful reminder of how God has created and protected the Earth.
So, how many in here have seen the Northern Lights firsthand? Yeah, for a long time. Everybody told me that you could see it and that it existed, and then I couldn't see it. I never could find it. And so I began to think for a while that it was mainly a figment of the imagination, or worse yet, that it was like the, what was that, the moon landing, that was staged. Until a few weeks ago, I was out in a field in Birch Run, because they said it was supposed to show up, and I got shot.
There it is.
With a windmill in the foreground. So now I'm a believer. They really do exist. Okay?
That was the recent one,
That was the last one that we saw.
a few months ago.
Well, no, this was actually just 3 or 4 weeks ago. Yeah. Now the one that was a few months ago, earlier in the summer, my nephew said, "Hey, look out! They're up there." I looked out; they weren't there. Then later on, he says, "Go out! They're up there." And I drove in the car towards Millington, and I never saw it. I'm going, "It ain't there." I found out later was the 2 times I was out that night, it had stopped. It started when I went back to bed. You know, so something was trying to fool me. Another thing that the previous one that talked about the stars and the multitude of stars. This is a shot I took of the Milky Way a few years back. It's really kind of cool to watch it. 80,000 light years across. Now, of course, a light year is 6 trillion miles. So 80,000 times 6 trillion is the number of miles it is from one end to the other. And that's just the Milky Way galaxy. 100 billion stars. Now, one of the cool things about it is I can tell you with pretty close precision exactly where that Milky Way is at any given moment. And I can show you right now where the Milky Way galaxy is. You look at this right here, Now, this is the windows, and this is what we're seeing all this right here from my camera. But that darker line there, that's the Milky Way. The Milky Way is actually right about the horizon right now. And if you go over here, that right there, that yellow, that orange dot, that's the galactic center of it. Okay, so sometimes when I'm doing this, and I was kind of hoping that it would be today, but it's not, I can actually hold it here and know that I see it, and so it's on the other side of the earth. It actually shows where it is exactly any time of day that I want. And what it does as time changes. So I can take this right here and I can move forward in time, and you can see that as time goes forward, now we're at 4 o'clock in the morning tomorrow, and I would have to come down here to see the galactic center right there. You see it? So in the early wee hours of the morning, the galactic center of the Milky Way is going to be down on the other side of the Earth, and it's going to be coming up this way. Right? So what do I use this for? If I want to take pictures of the Milky Way, I want to find out where it is, when it's going to be there, if it's going to be at a site that I'm going to be at. And this tells me. Science has done some amazing things, all right? Some people think I'm knocking science when I talk like this. Science has done some amazing things. Just to be able to make an app for my phone and tell me that, I couldn't do it, all right? It takes somebody a lot smarter than me. But the evidence as to why these things are there is what we're talking about. So the next thing I want to do real quick is just look through a list. We're not going to cover any of these, and then sum up with a couple of Bible verses. This list right here, and it's several pages long. It's actually, I don't even know if I've got the number of pages here. This comes from a website of a guy that I've talked to several times. Was an atheist. I'll talk about him more in the future a little bit. He went kicking and screaming into believing that atheism was not true, and now he's spent his entire life going through and talking about this 40 years. I mean, he had a regular job his whole life. He's a science person. And on weekends, he would go all over the world talking about why he believes in God now. This is from his website, and it is simply a list of the things that he knows, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages here of things that he knows are important to the survival of Earth that can't be explained any other way. Like the first one here, gravitational coupling constant, all right? If it's too large, no stars less than 1.4 solar mass can exist, hence short stellar lifespans. If it's too small, then no stars more than a certain, and those stars have to be in a certain range for it to work. Let's look at number 2, strong nuclear forces that bind the universe together. Let's look at number 12. Average distance between stars has to be a certain amount. 13. Solar luminosity. It can't be too bright. It can't be too dark, or we end up with the greenhouse effect not working correctly, or the oceans would be frozen. Let's look at, for instance, number 20, galaxy type. If our galaxy was too elliptical, we don't go right around the sun in a circle, we go in an ellipse. All right, they proved that back during the time of Kepler when he was doing what was at the time called wine barrel mathematics. He was trying to figure out a way to figure out how much was left in a wine barrel, so that they didn't have to dump it out and figure it out. And the mathematics he learned was an elliptical type of mathematics, and he applied it to the universe, and he found out that that's why we know that the Earth goes around the sun, not the other way around, then it's an elliptical orbit. All right, Kepler did that back 400 years ago, or whatever it was, 400 years ago. But this is saying that if it's too elliptical, it don't work, and if it's too irregular, it doesn't work either. So those have to be just right. Let's look at, oops. This is not, oh, I know. Sometimes I think if I tap on the other one, it takes me the other direction, but it doesn't. I have to swipe. So let's go to number 34, rotation period. The period, how long it takes to rotate is important. It can't be too, it's almost like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Can't be too soft, can't be too hard, it has to be just right. You know, it's a simple explanation, but that's basically what's being talked about here. And there are he's got 47 on here that he did as a scientist, and I don't understand half of those, and I know that this is not an exhaustive list. And these are things that the nature of these relationships are not between things that are, that have minds. This is inert matter to inert matter. But if all of these inert matter to inert matter relationships were not right, then human life couldn't exist. I find that as another insurmountable odds, so to speak, that the evidence points to a designer rather than an accident. But they don't think so. Now, Job was asked this. Now, if you remember, Job had a lot of problems. He lost his family, he lost his house, he got boils all over himself. He went from being a well-to-do, very, very healthy, happy guy to the most miserable guy on earth. All right? And so there's some questioning of God going on, especially of his friends. And there's an indication that Job might be wondering a few things himself. So God comes back and says, who is it that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? In other words, he's asking, you don't have the knowledge to ask these questions. All right? Brace yourselves like a man. I will question you. You won't question me. I'm going to question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, if you know so much. Who determined its dimensions? I think those same questions can be asked very, very easily to scientists today. And sometimes they can come up with a simple explanation of something that doesn't work in all cases, so they say we haven't found it yet. And if God questioned them a little bit more, they'd be going, all right? They sound like they've got it all together, but they do not. When Job goes through those chapters, when God goes through those chapters in Job, he asks, where were you when or do you know how, or do you know why? He asks all these questions about the oceans and the clouds and the snow and the hail and the thunderstorms and the grasses and the rain and the ice and the Orion's belt, things in the, up in the skies. The lion and the raven and the goat and the bear and the deer and the ox and the ostrich and the horses and the locusts and the eagles, and he goes on and on and on and on and on. Animals, birds, climate, solar system, planets. God's saying in this few chapters, these things not only have to depend on each other, they're all working together. All are in some kind of a relationship. Can you explain how all that happened? And the answer is no. Okay? Science can come up with some theories, but they don't know what they think they know. Instead, we go back to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we'll go just a little bit farther in that passage in Job, and what we see is, will the one who contends with me, with the Almighty, correct him? Let him who accuses God answer him. And I think that's where George Wall makes his big mistake, because we choose to believe the impossible as an atheist. Okay? That's all I'm going to do on relationships and the universe. We could do, I'm sure we could do weeks and weeks on it. But I don't want to belabor it, I just want to show you that there are inconsistencies, that I think the explanation is better shown by the evidence, that it was done by a designer rather than by an accidental set of events that had to happen over a very, 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 very long period of time. Any questions? Okay, yeah.
Random question. What is the app name that you were using for your phone? The constellations?
Photo pills.
Photo pills?
Yeah.
Photo pills. This probably.
There's a small price for it, I think. I
Okay.
can't remember. But photographers all have this on their phone.
Okay.
And there's a bazillion things you can do in photo pills that I have no idea how to use, and I'm learning little things all along. There's other apps I have on my phone that tell me when the sun's gonna come up, where it's gonna come up
Yeah.
at a specific location.
Mhm.
And just a lot of different ones like that. But photo pills is probably the most known by all photographers.
Gotcha. You know, it probably, it's so easy to, be a believer and read the Bible. Yeah, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Check, got it. But it's times like this where, you break it down like that and you see all the intricacies of all of these symbiotic relationships, as you said. And when you get to the end of like a class like this, and you really sit and think of the genius behind it, it goes without saying, but you're like, God, you are a super genius. This cannot happen by itself. It is impossible. If you're honest with yourself, it is impossible for this to happen by itself. So it necessitates a creator, and he's a genius.
The guy I got that list from that I kind of just went
Yeah.
through real quick is a guy named John Clayton. I'll explain sometime in the future class who he is and some of the stuff. He's got a website that's phenomenal. But one of the things that he says in one of his lectures is that we are told so little in the Genesis account as to what happened. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. So within, a few verses, we got the whole universe created. But what man wants is, and he rattles off some scientific stuff that would have to happen in a long run-on sentence. That's what we want to know, he says, as a scientist, but God doesn't let us know that because it's not important. Why isn't it important for God to put that in the Bible? Because that's not what the Bible is about. The Bible, and we may talk about this in the future, the Bible is about one thing. It's about sin and how to solve the sin problem. That's all the Bible's about. It's how can a holy and righteous God once again dwell with his unholy creatures. That's in one sentence is the entire story of the Bible. And what that dwells on is a seed that was introduced in Genesis chapter 3. And that story is about that seed all the way through to the end. So God's not trying to tell us a scientific story. He's not trying to tell us a historical story. He's not trying to tell us anything except for about that seed. But when he does talk about those things, because he has to mention it because it happens to come up in the story, he tells it just enough so that we know that what happened, what we're trying to see is whether it happened correctly. All right? So to him, those things are side issues.
Of course.
They're not what's important to the story, which is the reason why we don't get the details we want.
Which, when all this is said and done, and this whole story, at least in this chapter of eternity, is closed, it will be nice to ask him, tell us the science behind how you design.
I thought about that before, but the older I get, I'm not sure we're going to care.
I'm not sure we're going to care either. That's the funny thing.
But I don't know yet.
It still might happen simply because, God is a being who deserves praise for his work. And he might show us that stuff, tell us that stuff, simply so we can praise.
We might not be smart enough to understand it, so he might not tell us anyway.
That's kind of like I like to be overwhelmed by the detail genius behind something sometime. So that would be cool to experience.
All right, thank you. I've got some things planned already for next week, the next couple of weeks, and we're gonna shift just a little bit.